Good evening, everyone. I'm Sowmya. First of all, thank you very much for being here today, and thank you, Robert, for inviting us to present about our book to Bay Area NLP audience. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our book, Practical Natural Language Processing, which was published by O'Reilly Media last month. As the subtitle indicates, our book is a comprehensive guide to building real-world NLP systems, and during the course of this talk today, I'll talk a little bit more in detail about what exactly is in the book. How does this book distinguish itself from other books on NLP available in the market? So before I get into that, let me introduce me and my co-authors. So I work as a researcher at National Research Council Canada. Bodhi is currently an intern at Microsoft Research, and he's also a PhD student at UCSD in California. Anuj heads machine learning at Vahan Inc. in India, and Harshit is a CTO at Deep Flux, also based out of India. So I'm going to do this talk today, but all of us, all the co-authors are attending this session, and we'll all do the question answer session together. So before I start talking about the book, we would also like to announce that there is a small giveaway towards the end of this talk today. And we still don't know the exact logistics of how we will ship the books to you, but we know that this is only for participants within the US, and we'll decide whom to give the books for based on the question answer sessions or questions in the chat window. We'll get into more details about that towards the end of the talk. Okay, so let me start now about our book itself. So our book is about helping you build, iterate, and scale NLP systems and tailor them for various industry verticals. So we want you to use this as a playbook for successfully building NLP projects. That's the overall theme of the book. So I'm not getting into what is NLP because this is a NLP meetup, and I'm assuming everyone is familiar with some aspect of NLP, and you would have checked out one or many NLP books available in the market. So you may ask, why another NLP book? So we try to summarize the answer to this question in the form of this table by grouping available NLP books into three categories: standard NLP textbook, books talking about using deep learning with NLP, and books talking about using NLP with some kind of framework, some framework X. And the last column shows, of course, our book. So we talk about the differences in terms of different aspects. Like, say, for example, if you look at this table, if you take stuff like, say, doing ML ops, like talking about actual deployment of the software, maintaining the system, or talking about industry and business specific aspects of building NLP systems, or talking about an entire AI project lifecycle, we believe that none of the existing books cover those aspects. Or handling data scarcity, for that matter. Data scarcity is a real thing in the industry, but typically we don't see that being discussed in existing books. However, there is something that is already seen in many other books that is also seen in our book, that is the discussion of the usage of rule-based models or machine learning or deep learning. However, the only difference in our view is that we are not particularly married to one idea of, we should only use deep learning for everything, or we should only use rule-based systems for everything. We use each of them when needed, depending on the problem at hand. So this is how we would like to distinguish ourselves from other available NLP books. So the idea for this book came when some of the authors were organizing workshops and tutorials, or participating in mentoring sessions with engineers and data scientists. So we've noticed that there is a gap between what people learn in, say, courses or in classroom or from available textbooks and what is actually needed in industry practice. So over a course of doing these workshops, we also understood that this gap is not just for engineers or data scientists who actually are involved in building the systems, but it exists also for people who manage these kind of projects or say managers or CXOs. So this book came out of our experience in talking to these people and also out of the observation that existing material on NLP, existing books on NLP don't cover certain aspects. We think this book is for everyone involved in building NLP systems, like say data scientists or a machine learning engineer or a data engineer, a product manager, an annotator or a linguist who is working on creating data sets for building NLP systems, or even business leaders like say VPs, founders wanting to incorporate NLP in their business, or CXOs. So with that background, let me move to the outline of the book. So this figure shows the organization of our book. We start with some basic foundations of NLP, like say introducing what exactly is NLP, what are the aspects of language that make NLP challenging, what are the different methods for NLP, like say using machine learning or deep learning. What is a typical NLP pipeline? How do we collect data for NLP? What do we do if there are many languages involved? How do we even represent text? How do we extract features from text? So these are the topics covered in the first section of the book, that is foundations. So once we cover these foundational topics, we then move on to core tasks, what we call as core tasks. So core tasks are NLP tasks like say text classification or information extraction, chatbots, things like what you will commonly see when you're building NLP applications in real world. So at each point for each task, we try to connect them with some application, some general application, like say for text classification. The most common example is a spam classification. So the third part of the book then goes into industry-specific use cases of NLP, where we take different industries like say e-commerce or healthcare or finance, legal, and talk in detail about where is NLP useful in these different verticals and what are some specific problems that you face there and how does NLP solve them. The final section of the book brings everything together. Like say, for example, in all the above sections, we focus on how to build the system, but there's definitely much more to an end-to-end NLP product than the model development and model evaluation and those kind of things. So in the final chapter, we talk about how best practices for building and deploying systems. How do we hire AI teams? What are the project management processes one can follow and things like that. So with this introduction, let me now go chapter by chapter and talk about each of them in a little bit more detail. So the first chapter is NLP a primer. So the goal of this chapter is to introduce NLP to someone who is just starting out with minimal background. So we start with talking about different blocks of language and connecting them to some real world NLP applications. Like say, for example, phonemes, speech and sound, they connect more to the speech related applications, like say speech to text or text to speech. At the level of say understanding context, so we can look at summarization, topic modeling, and things like that. At the level of syntax, we can talk about say entity extraction or extracting relations between two entities, and so on. At the same time, we also try to categorize different NLP applications in terms of easy to hard problems to solve. Say, for example, spell checking is a relatively easy problem to solve compared to, say, machine translation. So we introduced this figure early on in the book just to give a perspective on the range of NLP problems that are available out there, and scenarios that we may encounter when we are working in an industry setup. So the next chapter is about building an NLP pipeline. So here we first start with a discussion on what are the different blocks of a typical NLP pipeline, starting right from data acquisition to talking about cleaning up and pre-processing text, extracting features, building models and evaluating them, improving the models, deploying them, and continuously updating the models. So we talk about each of these blocks in detail, considering different possible use cases, and with a lot of code examples. And at the same time, we also provide some practical guidelines based on our experience. Say, for example, for the case of available data. So this table here shows what to do when you have, like, say, a very small amount of data, or when you have very large amount of data, or when you have data but it's of poor quality, or when you have data which is like very long documents. So there are these different kinds of scenarios, and we suggest some decision paths to take, taking examples based on our own experiences in building these kind of NLP systems in the industry. The next chapter is text representation, which is extracting features from textual data. So in this, we cover a whole range of features, starting from very sparse representations and very basic representations like one-hot encoding to a bag of words, TF-IDF, and covering state-of-the-art text embeddings. We also talk about the role of handcrafted features, engineered features. In essence, we cover basically a whole range of possible text representation techniques, and by giving examples of when to use what and the advantages and disadvantages of each of them. So that finishes the foundational part of the book. So we now go into the core tasks. So the first core task we discuss in the book is text classification. As mentioned earlier, for this pipelines chapter and at the beginning of the talk, here too we take the approach where we start with a general text classification pipeline, is focusing more on the training process and evaluation process. But we at the same time also have some case studies of what to do when we don't have any data at all. How do we gradually collect data, build a model, and then improve that model, collect more data with active learning? How do we do this process iteratively? And when we talk about text classification, we start with a simple live-based model and then go into the more recent approaches of fine-tuning large pre-trained models like BERT for text classification. The next chapter is information extraction. So information extraction in NLP is not a single task. It has many different subtasks. So in this chapter, we talk about what are these various subtasks and what is the level of processing, NLP processing required to solve each of these tasks. So like, say, for example, key phrase extraction, named entity recognition, or relation extraction, and things like that. At the same time, for each of these tasks, based on our own experiences, we provide a lot of practical guidance on things like, should we develop our own model or should we use some existing approach? What should we do if our documents are too long and these things are taking forever? How do we how do we train our own say named entity recognition model if necessary, if I don't want to use existing ones? And at the same time, we also do some case study of how do we just start when we don't have any training data at all. Say, for example, here we collect some initial data, do some manual validation, build a small model, deploy it, get user feedback. Then as time passes, as we collect more data, then graduate into a more robust, more sophisticated, say, deep learning model. when more data is collected. So this is what you do in a real world scenario. Whereas in a typical NLP book, the discussion stops where, say, at the left-hand side. This kind of detailed discussion of real-world scenarios is something that we think is unique to our book, as far as NLP is concerned. Okay, the next chapter or the next task is building chatbots. So there are different kinds of chatbots. So in this book, we take the approach of introducing what are the different kinds of chatbots and how are they, what is their applicability in different domains, and we delve deeper into individual components of each of these chatbots. Like, say, for example, there is a FAQ chatbot, which is a relatively simpler chatbot where users ask questions and the chatbot answers from a fixed set of question and answers. And then there is a flow-based bot where you have to hold some conversation with the user about a particular task, like, say, ordering a pizza, as shown in this example. So here we, when the user says, I want to order so-and-so, like spinach and feta pizza, the bot should then get information from you about what size do you like, what are the toppings you want to have, do you want extra cheese, things like that, and eventually end up in basically delivering your pizza. The third kind of bots are relatively more complex, open-ended bots, which are expected to be capable of holding a conversation with you on any topic, like a human. So in this chapter, we talk about each of them in detail, discussing the existing solutions for these and how to use them to build your own solutions for your own problem scenario. So far in this section, we've been talking about individual tasks in detail. The last chapter in this section of the book is called Topics in Brief, where we talk about a whole range of other NLP tasks, some of which are like whole complete areas in themselves, like search, information retrieval is an entire area in themselves, or in itself, or recommendation systems, even machine translation. So we don't dedicate full chapters for these things, but we take a bunch of these other tasks and show some available solutions and talk about some practical advice, like, say, how do you deal with this specific scenario? How do you say, in the case of text summarizer, in the case of, say, text summarization, should you develop your own summarizer or can you use one of the existing ones? What are some of the problems with using text summarization or topic modeling? So we provide a detailed overview of these kind of issues that one may encounter when actually trying to build these kind of systems in the real world. So this is the last chapter for the section 2 of the book, where we talk about core tasks. The rest of the chapters, most of the rest of the chapters are focusing on how is NLP useful in specific industry verticals. The first case we take is that of social media. So there are many different ways in which NLP is useful while working with social media text in a real world application scenario. Say, for example, companies use social media data to understand the general product sentiment, what customers think about their company or about their product. Or they can use, say, Twitter data to parse the complaints received from customers and take action on them, do some kind of customer support activity. Or you can be building a fake news detector or misinformation spreader based on social media data. And there are many other different things you can do. You can be looking at, say, trending topics, or you can be looking at how people are responding to a particular disaster scenario in an area you may be trying to draw some insights using NLP. So we talk about all these different possible scenarios where NLP is useful, but then we also talk about the challenges involved in processing social media data compared to, say, printed text news articles or legal documents, the more formal documents that you typically see in NLP systems. So there are like people write their own spellings, or there may be multiple languages, there may be a lot of smileys, there may be memes. So how do we work with this different kind of data and pre-process the text and get a reliable feature representation? So we take a lot of examples of these scenarios and show using code examples how to process social media data in this chapter. And then take specific use cases of sentiment analysis and trending topic detection and show examples of how to do those things using available NLP methods. So the next chapter is on e-commerce and retail, where we talk about the use cases of NLP in this area, like say building an e-commerce catalog or extracting insights from reviews, say key phrase extraction from reviews, or doing some kind of sentiment analysis on reviews, like we see on Amazon. Like say we see good reviews or reviews with a 5-star, and then you see some helpful reviews or unhelpful reviews, review helpfulness prediction. And then there is also product discovery, like searching for products, showing related products, showing recommendations. So we give a detailed overview of these different kinds of use cases, and we also talk about specific details of individual problems. Like say this chart here shows how to do aspect level sentiment detection. You first detect aspects, and then you detect sentiment at each aspect, and so this shows how to approach that problem step by step. And the next chapter is about healthcare, finance, and law. So this figure shows the example use cases of NLP published by Chilmark Research. So they categorize NLP research in healthcare into 3 groups: next generation, emerging, and proven. So proven technologies are those which have been, where NLP has been used for a long time now. Like say, for example, collecting patient data capture in speech recognition, or helping in clinical documentation and things like that. And then there are emerging technologies, which are like relatively new technologies where NLP is used. For example, things like clinical trial matching or decision support or some kind of descriptive analytics. And then there are more next generation technologies which are currently in research, and NLP is being used actively in research, but they are not readily productized yet. Say, for example, drug discovery, or using NLP in phenotyping or triaging, patient triaging, or virtual therapy. So we discuss these various different use cases where NLP is used in healthcare by taking specific examples of tools and software available, and also talking about, say, pre-trained NLP models that are specifically tuned for this domain. We take a similar approach for finance and legal as well, for law as well, by starting with an overview of different use cases of NLP in these domains, and talking more in detail about what are some say tools, or what are some libraries, NLP libraries available for these domains, and how to use them. So this part of the book talked primarily about different industry verticals. Earlier, we saw some foundational steps for any NLP project, and like building an NLP pipeline, and then we saw a lot of core tasks. So throughout the book, the focus primarily has been on how to build a model or evaluate a model, how to some extent on how to collect data, but it's also part of building the model. However, there is much more to building a full NLP product, NLP system, than just focusing on building models and collecting data to build models and trying to apply them to different verticals, right? So the final chapter of the book, End NLP Process, tries to tie everything together, everything we discussed so far together, into the context of a project life cycle. So if you look at the life cycle of a typical AI project, we come across many different activities like planning, data creation, modeling, deployment. We also talk about, while planning, we also talk about like team and hiring, defining project, coming up with the right problem, setting right expectations. And then we start about building baselines and then, improving them. So the data modeling and to some extent deployment part is something we've been talking about. We talk about in other chapters as well. So in this chapter, we primarily focus on how to tie all of them together and talk about more about also the processes and how to hire good AI teams, what to be aware of. How do you do continuous deployment for an NLP project and things like that. At the same time, we also focus more on the best practices and processes to follow while building an NLP project. Say, for example, we talk about team data science process, which tries to bring a structure to building a data science project, including an NLP project. So starting with business understanding and then data acquisition and understanding and deploying the modeling and then deploying the model and then continuously monitoring the model, looking for customer acceptance in the end. So in this process, there are multiple steps and sub-steps, and the data science process provides guidelines on best processes to follow. So we think this is one aspect that is also typically missing from other available books on NLP, and we spend a lot of time here discussing on how these things fit into a larger end-to-end NLP process and how we use what we already learned so far, tying them up together. So in summary, we think this book provides recipes for building real-world NLP solutions in larger product setups. And as much as possible, we follow a minimum viable product approach. That is, we start with simple solutions and incrementally build on top of these solutions towards more and more complex approaches. Where possible, we use state-of-the-art techniques extensively supplemented with hundreds of references. As I also mentioned earlier, we also have a lot of code examples for each chapter and case studies of how a particular task works out in real world, considering different scenarios like, say, lack of data or a pre-trained model not working for you, or how to train your own model, discussing different aspects depending on the problem at hand. So this is about our book. So before I finish my talk, I would like to also share some of the praise we got for the book in the recent past. So the first one comes from Zach Lipton, who is a faculty member at Carnegie Mellon and also a scientist at Amazon AI. So he says, the first sentence, practical NLP focuses squarely on an overlooked demographic, the practitioners and business leaders in industry. While many great books focus on algorithmic fundamentals, this book exposes the anatomy of real-world systems. And this book will prove invaluable to industry professionals keen to build and deploy NLP in the wild. Our next quote comes from Sebastian Ruder, who is a scientist in Google DeepMind. So I'm not going to read the whole quote. I would like to just point to the last sentence, which says, overall, the book is a great manual on how to get the most out of current NLP in your industry. The third and last quote I'm going to show here comes from Mark Najot, who is a director at Google AI. Again, I like to point to the last sentence here. I'm not going to read everything. If you'd like to go from 0 to 1 in NLP, this book is for you. So if we look at these three quotes, which they talk about three different kinds of audience. Say someone who is just starting out in NLP, or people who are in product management or leadership roles in NLP, or people who are working on, like NLP practitioners, working on building actual NLP systems. We've been fortunate enough to be endorsed by several other well-known researchers, academics, and industry practitioners across the globe. And I hope these quotes that I showed convinced you, along with what I just said about the book, convinced you that this book is for everyone involved in building NLP systems. So the response to the book so far has been very good. So we were the #1 release in natural language processing on Amazon.com. And we were also the top best release in the entire AI and ML category. And we got some good reviews on Amazon.com from the early readers who bought and read the book. So we are very much looking forward for our future with the book, and we hope you are now interested in the book and you want to know more. And you hopefully will buy the book, read it, and share it with others. Thank you once again for hearing to this talk. And here are some links that are useful for you. So the book website has also links to purchasing the book on Amazon. And the GitHub page has all our code examples in the form of Jupyter notebooks. The Twitter, you can contact us using the Twitter handle or our contact email. So thank you once again, and we are now, all of us are ready to answer your questions.